Did you know that Roads to Liberty has a new website? It is roads, the number two, liberty.com. Please check us out today. Roads to Liberty is proudly sponsored by the Omaha UnConvention. May 25th through the 27th, the Omaha UnConvention will be welcoming Ron Paul, Senator Laura Ebke, Larry Sharp, and many more. For tickets or more information, visit www.omahaunconvention.com and use the code word ROADS for 20% off tickets. What's up, everyone? It is Zach with the Guardians of Liberty, and we are finally back. And it's mostly my fault that we were gone. I'm sorry.
It's not just your fault. We both had some issues in the last week, so it didn't happen. Sorry, everybody, but we're back, and we're better than ever, ready for another exciting episode.
Yep. So there's Nathan, there's me, and then we have the smartest man in the room, no matter what room he's in, Dr. Kyle Varner. How are you tonight?
I'm very well. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
So we were talking about having guests on, and Nathan was like, we need to get some of the people from the UnConvention because why wouldn't we? And that crossroad, because we're actually this will happen in post, but we're sponsored by the UnConvention now. So before this goes up, there will be like a live read for it, and I'm really excited about that. You are going to be at the UnConvention.
And I am very excited about the UnConvention, and I see the lineup of speakers developing for the UnConvention, and it's just amazing. I mean, you've got Ron Paul and Larry Sharp, Laura Ebke. I mean, these are all people for whom I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I learn something new from these people every time I talk to them. So I'm really excited. It's going to be an amazing meeting of the minds in Omaha.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you ever been to Omaha before?
I never have.
At least you're coming in late May and not right now when it's an absolute dumpster fire.
Well, I always thought that someday I'd make it financially, and then I'd be making a yearly pilgrimage to Omaha for the shareholders meeting of Berkshire Hathaway. But instead, I go for the Omaha UnConvention, which hopefully also becomes a yearly pilgrimage. So, and I'd rather it happen this way.
Definitely.
Yeah, you get to come talk liberty instead, which is way more fun.
It is way more fun talking liberty with Ron Paul, Laura Ebke, and Larry Sharp than it is talking about markets with Warren Buffett.
Yeah, I don't think you could talk about liberty with Warren Buffett. It doesn't seem to be.
I don't think you could. He doesn't believe that taxation is theft.
Yeah.
What?
He doesn't.
Oh.
He and Bill Gates are both very much on the whole, hey, tax us more. And, they never seem to realize that if they wanted to, they could just write the government a check. No one's going to say no.
Well, yeah. You tell them that, and then they just throw excuses at you like, because they don't really want to pay more. They just want to make other people pay more.
Exactly.
Because if it was really just that simple, you're right. They would just write a check, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah, well, the Austrian economists would say that Warren Buffett shows by his behavior that he doesn't believe the government is very good with money. Why? Because he's giving almost all of his money to the Bill Gates Foundation, because he says the Bill Gates Foundation is specialized and they're very good at doing the kind of work he wants done with his money. Mm-hmm. By his own behavior, he's saying that taxes are bad. He's saying, look, my money can be better used in the private sector. That's what I'm doing. And then he sits here and runs his mouth about how the government should tax everyone else a little more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it betrays his actual preference.
Exactly.
That's what it really is. You show what your actual preference is by the actions you take. So if you're giving all your money to private charity, you're showing everybody that, hey, you believe that this private charity is superior to government. Duh, everyone knows that, but then he's belly aching, like you said, about how the government needs to tax everybody and regulate everything and whatnot. And I don't want to speak too bad about him because he's the Oracle of Omaha and everybody loves him. but he does have a very strong statist streak to him, which is
Yeah.
very annoying.
Well, that's what happens is you make it and then you set up regulations so that the next guy can't challenge you. That's business 101, really.
It is business 101. Yeah. Regulations always protect the market incumbents. Always.
So, see, Nathan, you were worried about not having anything to talk about, and we haven't even gotten to our topics yet.
Just start out with a tangent.
I mean,
that's how we roll here.
We got to complaining about Warren Buffett. Yeah, he was a big shill for Hillary Clinton. I mean, he opened up for her when she came to Omaha, and Hillary Clinton was talking about when they win this state, like that was ever going to happen, that she was going to come and dance down the streets of Omaha with Warren Buffett, and she never got her chance. Thank God, she never got the chance to dance in the streets with Warren Buffett.
That is so bizarre. That ranks up there as one of the more bizarre things from the 2000s, that she was going to come dance down the street with Warren Buffett. I mean,
yeah, in Omaha after she won the state.
To be fair, Omaha went for Obama once, so because of we're one of the two states that you get 2 electoral votes for winning the state, and then you get 1 electoral vote for each district. We have 5, okay. So all our 3 districts, each district you win gives you another electoral vote. Obama took basically 1st or 2nd district, which is essentially Omaha.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'll take the Aleppo moments over comments about dancing down the street with Warren Buffett any day.
I can't imagine Hillary Clinton dancing. That's the thing that the plebs do. She's above that.
I mean, she may have fallen and broken her hip while she was doing it. So that might have been the end of the Hillary Clinton presidency right there.
Well, she's on anticoagulants, so that would not be a good thing for her.
That's like blood thinners, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
She's on blood thinners, so
you gotta dumb it down for me, please.
Yeah, the Omaha, Warren Buffett, and Hillary Clinton, quite a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we chat a little bit about healthcare, since we got onto the topic by mentioning that Hillary Clinton's on blood thinners.
Yeah, so the reason we have you on is you are the expert in the libertarian healthcare discussion. You want to give a quick background of your medical history so everyone understands that you're not just here because you're a smart guy on the internet?
Sure. So let's see. I went to St. John's College, where I read a bunch of very old books for 4 years and got a liberal arts degree. And then I went overseas to the American University of Antigua College of Medicine, and I got my MD. And I did my residency at Tripler Army Medical Center in internal medicine. And I currently practice medicine as a hospitalist in Washington State, Maine, and some other random places wherever they have staffing shortages. I kind of parachute in times of high demand and low supply. That's my career in medicine. And my career in libertarian politics is actually much longer. I first joined the Libertarian Party in 1999, and I served as a delegate to the National Convention in 2000, where I voted for Harry Brown, even though I was only 15 years old at the time. I could vote at the convention, but I couldn't vote in the actual election. But that was really a highlight of my youth. And so I've remained very devoted to libertarian ideas since I was very young. And so healthcare was kind of a divergence from that. It was, politics was my passion, and then I had to go do something for a living. And I started to really like healthcare and medical science. But it turns out that libertarian politics and Austrian economics have a lot to say about healthcare, because freedom can make us live longer lives. And if you look in a broad sense around the world, you'll see that there's a very strong correlation between longer lives and more freedom. And I would argue that probably has to do with the fact that more freedom means more wealth. But the point is that we need libertarian ideas in healthcare in America today. And so I've devoted myself over the last several years to promoting that idea. And I've gone around the country speaking on the topic. And that's really my passion now is trying to explain and educate to people why it is that more freedom in healthcare is going to lead to better outcomes and a better experience for everyone.
How successful would you say you've been at that? How prevalent are libertarian ideas among the medical field?
You would be very surprised because there is a lot of dissatisfaction among physicians, nurses, and the frontline people, the people who are actually providing the care with the system we have. The reason there's so much dissatisfaction is, it's very sad to say, but I spend more time in front of a computer clicking boxes, writing reports, than I do spending face-to-face time with my patients. There's something wrong with that. More than half of my day is clicking boxes in front of a computer to appease insurance companies. And why are the insurance companies involved? Only because of a Byzantine system of regulations and a history of government involvement that spans a century that has built a system that is irrational and harmful. And it's literally taking over half the manpower away. Nurses spend more than half their shift in front of a computer, clicking boxes as well. So the people who are delivering care are very dissatisfied because we got into this business to provide health care, and here we are as computer monkeys for insurance companies. It's infuriating. So when I talk to people, they understand this kind of on an intuitive level, and they understand that we are overregulated. There are some misconceptions, though. A lot of people believe that if we would just nationalize the insurance companies or do what they call as Medicare for all, that things would magically get better. If someone will sit down with me and have an open mind, I can convince them that that is not the way to go. But they have to sit down with an open mind in order to do that. And so it's very much kind of a person by person task. And what I have to do is I have to explain why the system has the problems that it does before I can explain what the solutions are. But when you understand why the system has the problems, then you know that more government is just going to add fuel to the fire and make the problems worse, not better.
So you were talking about spending a bunch of time at a computer, and you said that you did residency at an Army hospital. So I'm assuming you're going to know what I'm about to talk about here. Last time I went and saw my primary, because I go to the VA here in Omaha, she spent about 25% of my time sitting in the room with her, actually interacting with me. The rest was all her trying to frantically get information on the computer.
Yeah.
I think that people would understand a little bit better how dumb national health care would be if they had to do it the way that they do it with vets, and they're having to do all this while we're in the room, because I think that would show people just how terrible the system is right now.
Exactly. I mean, so you have to ask, why are people spending so much time at the computer? And so in the VA, they don't have a billing issue to worry about because it's a so-called single-payer system. In fact, if you want to see what a single-payer system looks like, look at the VA and ask yourself if you want everybody to get their care from the VA. And go look at the Phoenix VA, and you can look and see what bureaucratic self-interest in a single-payer system does. They literally let people die on waiting lists that they were hiding from view of the people giving them oversight so that they could get their bonuses. Bureaucratic self-interest. People who want to extend that system to the entire country are either very foolish, very cruel, or both. But to get back to your point, why else are people spending so much time at the computer? Well, it's self-defense, because we have such a litigious system, and even a single lawsuit can follow you and derail your career for decades, that you want to spend as much time as possible documenting details of what you've done for that person that you're seeing. So it's not just very simple. I saw the guy, he has appendicitis, he's going to go for surgery in the morning, I'm giving him a dose of ertapenem right now. No, that doesn't work. You have to go step by step, detail by detail. I do most of my notes on the telephone. I dictate and someone transcribes them. And in a given day, I might transcribe 150 page or dictate rather 150 pages of reports. I mean, that's like a novel every day that I'm dictating. It's crazy, and so for me, part of it is making sure that I meet all the elements in the notes I need so that I can get paid because I'm in the private sector. But even more than that is explaining, here's why I did this. I'll say things like, I'm aware the guidelines say that I should do this, but for this reason, and this reason, that doesn't work for the patient, so I'm going to do this instead. And I explain the guidelines to the patient, and they understand why I'm doing this, and it's all self-defense, but it's hours and hours every day that we spend in this preemptive self-defense because we're all so terrified of liability, and you've got lawyers out there ready to ding you over every bad outcome if they can get away with it.
So how does government contribute to this system? How is it that government makes it necessary to essentially write a novel every day?
All right, so we have to go back to World War II. That's a little lesson in economic history. And in World
I
War
love
II,
those.
Yeah. So World War II, we saw labor shortage in the United States because there was a huge ramping up of factories. And we also saw price controls. And so there were wage controls. The factories were not allowed to pay more for labor. But there was a loophole, and that loophole was healthcare plans. And so you could pay the maximum wage allowable by the state, and then you could also give someone a healthcare plan. And in that healthcare plan, you could include your regular doctor's visits, your prescriptions, your labs, your hospitalizations. You could make it an all-inclusive healthcare plan, and that increased the effective compensation for your employees. So it was a way to get around the wage and price controls. Medicare came along shortly thereafter and started this huge system of third-party payers. So you had the health insurance, the Blue Cross and Blue Shield provided by the factories, and then you have Medicare coming along shortly thereafter. And what you saw was this system whereby people went and received their care. However, the government, the insurance company, or in some cases the government, was paying for the care. So you had this disconnect, and prices started going crazy. And so at that point, you started seeing healthcare inflation just take off. And they had to make some changes to the system in order to try to keep the prices under control. And little by little, that is built to a system where what we do is coded into kind of a matrix. So I have to, for example, comment on 7 different systems of the patient to meet a certain level for billing. I have to document examination of a certain number of systems. I have to comment a certain number of factors of their illness. So I have to say, where does it hurt? How do they describe it? What intensity is it? When did it start? What relieves it? What makes it worse? I have to document all these different things, and some pencil pusher is going to go through afterwards in an audit, and they're going to look and see if I met all those documentation points, and if not, they're going to dock my pay. This all happened because initially in World War II, we had those wage and price controls, and the healthcare was the loophole. And now you have a system whereby the employer is able to write off the cost of providing healthcare when it's provided via an employer and provided as a third party. If the employer just said, well, I'll just increase your salary by $10,000, that's going to be taxed for you, the employee. But if you receive a healthcare plan, that's not going to be taxed. So the system still incentivizes running all of your healthcare expenses through third-party billers. And when a third party pays, they call the shots, and they want to control their costs, and so they do it by implementing a Byzantine system where they can deny payment as much as possible. And so that's what you're seeing. So that's one side of it. And the other side is the liability. And we have liability gone mad. Why? This isn't so much of a strict libertarian issue because libertarians would say that liability is an important part of a capitalistic system. If you harm someone, you must compensate them. And I don't think anybody would argue that you shouldn't. But what you have now are the development of things like nuisance lawsuits. So legal fees are so expensive, insurance companies will settle just so they don't have to go to court. And so you've had this proliferation of lawyers who are out there basically chasing ambulances and going after people. And so you've built up this system that's extremely litigious. And so this combination of the insurance companies trying to control their costs, because they have this moral hazard issue to deal with because people are receiving care but not paying, so they don't care how much it costs, combined with lawyers basically hunting for scraps, has produced volumes and volumes of documentation, and it's gotten really, really crazy.
See, this is why I like to tell people that if you just dig deep enough into most problems we deal with in this country, there's almost always a government solution that caused it.
Yes.
If you just go back far enough and dig deep enough, I mean, people will tell you constantly that this is a result of free market capitalism, that it's capitalism's fault that prices are so high and doctors have to deal with so much documentation. But like you said, it's not capitalism that did this. This was a result of price controls implemented by government.
Yes. If you want to see capitalism in healthcare, look at laser eye surgery. Laser eye surgery has almost completely been exempt from these kind of payment systems set up by the incentives that I just described. Laser eye surgery, when it was first introduced in 1999, cost about $2,000 an eye, so $4,000. Today, go to Groupon, type in laser eye surgery, and you're going to see $700 for one eye or both eyes. You're going to see great deals, sometimes $400 an eye. The price has come down tremendously. So you see in this one area where the free market has largely flourished in healthcare, not completely because there are still issues, but largely flourished, and you see the prices come down. More and more people can afford it. The quality has gone up. And then you see something like diabetes care or appendectomies or gallbladder surgeries, and the price just keeps climbing. And you have to ask yourself, what's different? And the difference is the one has a market and the other has centralized planning and third-party payers. The third-party payers are what are ruining healthcare. Or well, they're one of the main factors, I should say. I don't want to say they're the only factor, but they're one of the main factors ruining the healthcare industry, and there's nothing free market about it.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate. If I were a leftist, I might say, well, look at Canada, look at England, look at Western Europe. They all have single-payer healthcare systems. Sweden, Denmark, countries like this. These are what we want. These are the systems we want. And people get better care than what we do here. So what would you say to that?
Well, I would say people don't get better care than what they get in the United States. If you take an honest look at the medical literature, outcomes are roughly the same. Okay, so to be honest, they're roughly the same, and we pay about twice what they pay per capita for healthcare. So on the surface, it looks like they're doing a better job, but there are big problems. And let's look at England to see what their big problems are. Recently in England, they canceled a bunch of elective surgeries. They said if you smoke or if you're obese, we're not going to do elective surgeries on you for some period of time because the NHS is strapped for cash. This is bureaucratic compassion. If you have eye pathology, for example, diabetic retinopathy in both eyes is very severe and you need surgery, in England, the NHS is going to say which eye is better, and they're going to fix that eye, and they're going to be very kind and compassionate and give you a free taxpayer-funded eye patch for the eye they don't fix. Now, that's not going to affect your longevity. It's going to affect your quality of life, although only slightly. In England, you have bureaucrats who decide whether or not to approve care on the basis of something they call quality-adjusted life years. So they say, well, if you're 25 and you could live another, and you have, for example, lymphoma that is curable, well, we're going to devote a lot of resources to that because we think you have a lot of quality-adjusted life years left. However, if you are elderly or extremely young, like an infant, and you have a very expensive disease, we may not approve that because you don't have enough quality-adjusted life years. These are bureaucrats getting out their calculators and deciding who lives and who dies based on a bureaucratic assessment of someone's life expectancy and their quality of life.
But I was told there wouldn't be death panels. I feel lied to right now.
Well, the phrase death panels is is a charged phrase that is useful in political discourse, but not useful when you're really looking at a system. Because these aren't panels deciding on a case-by-case basis who lives or who dies. They're panels that are creating mathematical formulas trying to decide whose life it's worth to save and whose life it isn't worth to save. And what we're getting at here is that this is people think that under a capitalistic system, insurance companies will try to let people die to make a buck. And I mean, they're right. Insurance companies will try to let people die to save a buck, but so will bureaucrats. And so the question is, do we want to pursue a system where our money is taken from us, either in the form of taxes or mandatory insurance payments, and then given to bureaucrats who decide whether we live or die? Or do we want to pursue a system where we keep our own money and then we retain control of our health care and we decide whether something is worth it or not worth it? I would like to decide for myself. I would like my patients to decide for themselves.
See, I think the key, go ahead. I think the key difference is that in a free market system, you have recourse. You can always say, you know what, screw you, Blue Cross. I'm going to XYZ healthcare company, and I'm gonna go through them now because you suck. I hate you. These guys, they do a lot better, so I'm going to go to them.
Yeah,
and the market sorts itself out. But when it's some bureaucrat in Washington D.C. who's making all these decisions, what do? You got no recourse.
Yeah, you have no recourse. Your money has already been taken from you, and now you are at the mercy of your overlords to determine whether you will receive the care or not.
Exactly, and then the people will say, "Oh, you just vote in you just vote someone else in." But these are permanent bureaucrats. You don't vote for an FDA official. These guys are permanent. They don't change with changing administrations. Doesn't matter if you vote for Trump or Hillary. That guy's going to stay the same. He's there forever. You don't vote him out.
Yeah. Well, I think if you were to take the general population and divide them on simply the basis of whether they understand what public choice theory is, you would be able to also divide them on whether they support a bureaucratic takeover of healthcare. Because if you understand public choice theory, the theory that suggests bureaucrats act in their own self-interest, you would then understand that a healthcare system run by bureaucrats is a healthcare system run not for the benefit of patients, but for the benefit of the bureaucrats. And what better example than the Phoenix VA that let people die on waiting lists so that they could look good. They hid the waiting lists, they let people die, and then they reported that they had low wait times so that they could avail themselves of career advancement. That's public choice theory in action. It's the way bureaucrats behave. Once you understand public choice theory, I don't think you can advocate for government control in healthcare.
No, I absolutely agree. The thing is that most people, they look at our system and think this is free market capitalism. And then they look over at Canada and England and say, you know what, that's better than what we have. So that's better than capitalism. But that's not the case at all.
No,
free market capitalism.
And they don't, in Canada, there's a trope, people have to wait a long time. I have a personal story about that. I took care of a lady who had carotid artery stenosis. Which is where your carotid artery here gets plaque, clogging it. And this lady had been having TIAs up in Canada. And she was on a waiting list to get a carotid endarterectomy, which is a surgery that can open up the carotid artery, and it's proven to prevent strokes. And she had been waiting for a year. And she came down to the United States for a holiday. And she had a major stroke. And she showed up at my hospital with a stroke. I admitted her, and we proceeded to treat her for her stroke, perform her carotid endarterectomy, give her the physical therapy necessary, and eventually we were able to send her home. But this is an example of what can happen when bureaucratic delays cause people not to be able to access health care. You think that in Canada everybody has health care. Well, this poor lady had health care. They were even able to diagnose the problem. They were able to identify an intervention whereby they could prevent her from having a stroke. What they weren't able to do is actually fix the problem because their system is overloaded. because bureaucrats have designed it. And when you have price controls and central planning, you have bread lines, Soviet-style bread lines in the Soviet Union. And in Canada, you have carotid endarterectomy lines. And in the Soviet Union, people starved. And in Canada, people stroke out. I don't think this is a system we should emulate.
Absolutely not. I think, Zach, did you have a couple questions that you wanted to ask?
So, to jump into what we actually brought you on for, because there was a topic that we still haven't hit.
Opioids, yes.
Yes. So the first, gosh, and I lost it because this has been really interesting, and then I lost the questions.
I put it up on the chat.
Okay. So kratom is something that we've heard. You wanted to talk about it. I've heard a lot about it here in Omaha. It's suddenly becoming a thing that people care about. What's kratom?
Well, kratom is an herb that people are using for pain control, anxiety control. Some people who are on opioids are using kratom to get off of opioids. In terms of how useful it is, I don't know. I've never used it myself. I've never prescribed it or recommended it. But I know there are a lot of people out there who are finding it useful. And the FDA and the DEA are disturbed by this. So disturbed, in fact, that they have done some studies, and they recently concluded that kratom acts as an agonist of the mu receptor. So the mu receptor is the primary receptor for an opioid drug. And it's what makes us feel euphoric. It's what mediates its pain-relieving properties. And it's this receptor in our bodies that the DEA would like to have control over, because they are using the fact that it acts as an agonist of the mu receptor as justification to say it is a Schedule I drug. And that's what they're moving to, is to be able to say kratom is a Schedule I drug. People who sell it belong in prison along with Ross Ulbricht. People who use it belong in prison, along with any other person in prison. And they should be completely deprived of their ability to access this medication. Why? Because it touches part of their body that the DEA says you may not touch without a prescription.
So they own that part of your body, is what they're saying.
They own your mu receptors. The government owns your mu receptors. Donald Trump.
I want my moos, damn it.
Yeah, Donald Trump is the gatekeeper to your mu receptor, and this is really cruel, because we've seen enough of anecdotal reports of people saying, "I'm getting off of painkillers with kratom. I'm dealing with my anxiety with this medication." And the DEA said, well, there are like 30 or 40 reports out there of kratom being a factor in an overdose death. Now, what does a factor mean? Could mean anything. They could have, ingested 10 grams of fentanyl and then smoked some kratom, died because of the fentanyl, and then the kratom's a factor. That doesn't mean people are dying from it. Now, I'm not going to vouch for the safety of kratom, but there is a place in this world for the phrase of caveat emptor. You're putting it in your body. You're taking a risk. You research it and make the decision and live and die by that. We don't need the DEA to be telling us what substances are safe and not safe for us. Especially in these instances where we see a lot of reports of people getting benefit from it, and the DEA is just cutting it off. Just like they cut off research into psychedelics for about 40 years, and we have an epidemic of mental health problems and suicide, and little by little we're learning that psychedelics may be a silver bullet for a lot of people for treating things like depression. But that research into that area was cut off by draconian drug laws, and as a result, people are dying. The unintended consequences of our drug laws are inhumane.
Are they unintended, though? Like, at some point, you have to think some of this is malicious, because it happens every time.
You're right. The bootlegger and the Baptist theory of regulation, right, suggests that there are the Baptists, the people who really believe that we should control drugs and restrict people. So these would be people probably like Jeff Sessions and Joe Arpaio, who just have in their hearts a lust for control. And then you have the bootleggers, which is big pharma in this case, probably the people who, the alcohol companies, the tobacco companies, who have a financial benefit, also prison guard unions, private prisons. So those are the bootleggers in this case. And what keeps these laws on the books is a political coalition of the bootleggers and the Baptists. And so you're absolutely right not to ascribe 100% to these people that they're just doing it for foolish reasons. There are absolutely people out there engaging in malicious campaigns, and I think if you look at the people who've been opposing marijuana legalization, you see a lot of things like prison guard unions, police unions, alcohol companies, pharmaceutical companies opposing the legalization of marijuana, and you can conclude only that they're doing it for their own financial gain.
I mean, so I had a friend who was a drug dealer in Missouri. We played WoW together, so you meet the most fun people gaming on the internet. And he said, so he didn't do this, allegedly, I don't know. But some of the other major drug dealers in his area were funneling campaign donations into candidates that were anti-drugs, because if that ever becomes legal, it destroys their business.
Of course. I mean, what is the biggest threat to the drug cartels in Mexico? I would argue it's probably the Libertarian Party. The biggest threat to, what is that gang that Donald Trump always talks about, M16 or M13?
MS-13.
MS-13, thank you. Libertarian Party is probably the biggest threat to them. We will take away their source of revenue. Donald Trump will put members of their gang in prison from time to time when he's able. But, you know, little hands can only put handcuffs on so many people. The Libertarian Party will cut off their source of funding. So we're the ones who are actually offering a solution to make our communities safer in that regard. So you're absolutely right. There's a financial side to this.
Yeah, you would think that if the drug war were actually effective, that they would have won it by now. With as many millions of dollars and as many years they've had to actually, you know, win this war on drugs, that they might have had a little more success by now. But getting back to Kratom, this sounds absolutely insane. You're essentially saying that because Kratom makes people feel better, that the government wants to come in and regulate it. And it's funny because I've been hearing ads for Kratom on the radio locally for years now. They've been selling this forever, and it's all over the place. I've never once heard of it being a problem, but here you are telling me that the government apparently thinks this is a problem, despite it having no ill effects in this area.
That's correct. And they think it's a problem because they assert ownership over your mu receptors.
Is this like, what was it when I was in the Army? Spice? Is it like that?
Well, spice is a word that describes a lot of different synthetic cannabis products that they're basically.
Okay. And this is natural, right?
I want to say Kratom is natural.
Okay.
That it is somehow natural. I mean, you know, spice is would never exist in a world without prohibition, because spice was created due to prohibition, and spice has a lot of problems because it's like 100 times as potent as cannabis, and it also lowers the seizure threshold, which cannabis doesn't do. So the main problems I've seen with spice are people having seizures because of it. I never see people having seizures from marijuana, and I practice in a state where marijuana is legal. So I see people, people smoke pot all the time, and I see them after smoking pot, not because of the pot, but occasionally they'll have sickly vomiting from the pot. But beyond that, really we don't have problems with marijuana anymore. But spice we have problems with. And when I practiced in my residency in a military hospital, spice was a much bigger issue because they would get tested for marijuana, so they couldn't use the safer substance, so they'd use the less safe substance, and they'd end up having seizures and stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember, because this was like briefings that I was getting as I was on my way out, so I wasn't paying much attention. And I've always been kind of straight edge anyway, so it seemed like the hospital Reynolds down in Fort Sill was having a lot of problems with spice, and I always thought, well, if it's based on marijuana, why is there a problem? Because marijuana is not really going to do anything to you.
Yeah, but it's because it's not marijuana. That's the problem. I mean, you know, if you want to solve your problem with spice, you know, let your soldiers smoke pot. I mean,
yeah, but see, then they'll have reefer madness and go crazy.
You know, or they, I mean,
because the PTSD isn't doing that already.
Weight standards. I mean, you know, you're gonna have more people in your pork chop brigade, as they call it, but
That was always me.
That guy.
My discharge was because of weight, so that was me.
You know, this is an illustration of the bigger problem, which is unintended consequences, and it gets serious because right now we're dealing with a problem of a drug called carfentanil. Have you guys heard of carfentanil?
I haven't, no.
Okay,
I've heard of fentanyl. Is that the same thing?
Well, it's similar. So
Okay.
carfentanil is 10,000 times more potent than morphine, and it's a derivative of fentanyl, but it's super, super potent. So what it means is that if you had a gram of carfentanil, that would be the equivalent of 10 kilograms of morphine, in terms of the effect it would have on the human body. Now, this drug was used as an elephant tranquilizer in the distant past, and it was also used in a couple of counterterrorism operations in Russia, where there was a theater that was being held hostage, and they pumped a gas in to basically knock everybody out so they could go in and rescue the hostages. And they used carfentanil in that instance. And lately, it's been making its way onto the streets of the United States. And I have seen a couple of cases where I suspected carfentanil at play. We don't have the ability to readily test for it, so I can never tell you for sure if I've seen carfentanil, but I believe I've seen carfentanil. And it's extremely potent. So these people take a little bit of it, and then they just go apneic. They stop breathing, and they basically die. And you can give them Narcan, the antidote to any opioid, but you need a lot of Narcan to reverse it, way more than you do. And then 5, 10, 15 minutes later, they're back to not breathing. It's a really serious problem. It's very, very deadly. And so we have to ask ourselves, why is this flooding the streets? And we have to look at the history of opioid abuse in America going back 20 or 30 years. You know, it used to be people were using heroin. And then the U.S. government managed to disrupt the supply of heroin, and people started moving towards more synthetic type of drugs. About 8 or 10 years ago, the DEA required the manufacturers of oxycodone to manufacture it in a form that was less easily abusable. So if you crushed the pill, it would turn into a gel. It tanked the street value. The addicts didn't want to use it, so they started searching for something else. And that's when we started to really see these synthetic opioids like fentanyl, and now carfentanil hit the scene. The other thing about these drugs is they're easier to smuggle. You can get a small amount of carfentanil and then cut it with whatever inert substance is easily obtained in the United States, and you can basically smuggle an entire kilogram of heroin on the back of a postage stamp. So because you need to smuggle these drugs, you're getting them now. People are buying what they think is heroin or oxycodone, but they're ending up with carfentanil and they're ending up dead. And it's an unintended consequence of the war on drugs. In the absence of the war on drugs, these addicts would be taking tablets of a far less potent opioid. They'd know exactly what dose they were getting. They would be free of adulterants, and they would have ready access to Narcan if they needed. The harm would be much less. We would have way fewer deaths. The reason the death toll is so high is because of prohibition. It's driving this issue.
Yeah, but another example of a problem in society that once you dig past the surface, this is caused by government, not solved by it.
You're absolutely right. It's caused by government. And
so you were saying earlier that this was like our government developed this as well?
I'm not sure who initially developed carfentanil. I want to say that it was probably developed in some pharmaceutical lab, but it was relegated to like use as an elephant tranquilizer and in military purposes in Russia until people started getting desperate for an opioid because they have managed to restrict the supply of things like heroin and things like oxycodone, the safer drugs. And that led to people searching for alternatives. And this is the alternative they came across because it's easy to smuggle.
So from a pure, because I've studied this more from the criminal justice side. That's what my minor's in. From the medical side of things, how dangerous do you think heroin would be if it was legal?
I think heroin would be about as dangerous as OxyContin if it were legal. Heroin. You guys know that heroin was a brand name. The company that owned it was Bayer. And I want to say about 1914 is when it got prohibited. And this was a lot of the same movement of the people who wanted to prohibit alcohol also wanted to prohibit the opioids. And to be fair, opioids are dangerous drugs with potential to really screw people's lives up and kill people. So I understand the impulse to say we want to control this, but they set us down that road of the development of drug cartels and of the incremental worsening of the harm associated. If you're just taking a tablet of heroin manufactured by Bayer that you bought at the corner drugstore, you will know exactly how much you're taking. There will be no adulterants. And these two things, and you will likely not inject it. And so these things will mean that, yeah, you're going to get high, you're going to have problems, you will still have some chance of overdose and death, but overall, the aggregate harm is going to be much lower. The problem is that moralists will disapprove of this. They want to control you. They want to make you behave morally. Think Jeff Sessions, think Joe Arpaio, think Donald Trump. They have an idea of how you should live your life, and they're going to tell you. And they don't care if their ability to enforce that on you ends up killing you. They're still going to do that. And
go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, so for libertarians, this is very often a difficult subject. Marijuana, we can win all day on. Marijuana is easy. It's once you get to the hard drugs that things get difficult. And it reminds me, in the last presidential cycle, Gary Johnson had a CNN town hall, and there was a mother there, and she told him a story about how her son had overdosed on, I believe it was heroin or cocaine, some hard drug of that nature. And he had taken this drug, and it had been cut with something else. And the result was he passed away from it. And I remember Gary Johnson's response was very lukewarm. He's like, oh, I'm not in favor of legalizing that. I just want to legalize marijuana. I remember thinking, this is the wrong approach to take. Instead of saying, hey, I don't want to legalize hard stuff, let's just legalize marijuana, the superior answer would just say, look, we've had this war on drug for decades now. We spent millions of dollars. And what did it do for your son? Did it save him? Is he alive because of the drug war? No, he's dead because of the drug war. I mean, maybe it's a very difficult thing to say to somebody, but the simple fact of the matter is, as you say, if these drugs were legal, that death would not have occurred. And I think that's an important message to tell to people. As bad as these drugs may be for individuals, it is far better to deal with those consequences than to deal with the consequences caused by prohibition.
I completely agree. The drug war is making it worse. And I remember watching that and saying, oh, Gary, I wish you were Austin Peterson right now.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, because there were 2 points that needed to be made. One, her son would likely be alive today if not for prohibition. So to use her son's death as an argument for prohibition is irrational and quite frankly cruel. And number 2 is, what was I going to say for number 2? Is that this happened in the context of prohibition. It was illegal, and yet he got his hands on them and he died. So you've just shown prohibition isn't working. People still get their hands on all these drugs. And it's relatively easy. I think any of us, if we wanted to, can just walk. We would know where to go to get any drug we want. Just walk to, the local high school or bowling alley. Ask around. Somebody's going to know who the local dealer is. You could probably post on Craigslist. I'm looking for some Molly. There are tons of drugs are readily accessible to anybody who wants them, as is, even though they're highly illegal. So you're not saving lives, you're killing people. And it gets really, really stupid. And so we were getting over to loperamide. Loperamide now is going to be subject to sales restrictions, and they're going to put it behind the counter at the pharmacy, and you're only going to be able to buy small portions of it. Why? Because loperamide is an opioid. Loperamide is an opioid that does not cross the blood-brain barrier. It means for all intents and purposes, you cannot get high on it unless you are very crafty, creative, and basically a chemist. you're not getting high off of loperamide, but it will stop
So-
your diarrhea because it acts on the mu receptors in your gut to slow things down.
And
Now-
I live on this stuff, so this is very important to me. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to go to a pharmacy and ask for. Am I gonna need a prescription for it?
You are not going to need a prescription, but you will have to announce to everyone in line at the pharmacy that you have diarrhea, that you're at risk of shitting your pants. You'll have to tell the pharmacist that you need this embarrassing medication, and they will probably give you a week or two supply. You will not be able to just buy what you need. And this is so foolish. You can't even get high off the stuff. But the government is asserting ownership of your mu receptors, and it doesn't matter if they're the mu receptors in your brain or if they're the mu receptors in your bowel. Jeff Sessions owns them. And Jeff Sessions will assert his dominance over you.
I feel like Jeff Sessions was the kind of guy who got bullied relentlessly as a child, and this is just his way of getting back at everybody.
Yes, he may well have gotten bullied, but, I tend to think there's something more sinister. Jeff Sessions' fellow Alabama Republican Roy Moore was shown to be a very sinister guy during the election. And you always find that with social conservatives, is that they are compensating, whether it's sexually because they want to say we're against the gays, we're against the promiscuous people, we're against the pornography, and then you find out it's because they have child porn on their computer. So that also, I think, probably applies to people who want to control what you do in other aspects of your life. They have a dark side they don't want other people knowing about, and they are projecting. It's what there's that phrase from Shakespeare, methinks the lady doth protest too much. I'm sure that Jeff Sessions has a dark side. And he's tormenting the United States as a result.
You see, I think Jeff Sessions is the Baptist that you were talking about earlier. I think he honestly believes the nonsense he's talking about. I honestly think that I really do think that if, in his mind, if you legalize marijuana, all hell's gonna break loose. Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria, all this nonsense. I don't think he's the bootlegger type. I think he is the honest-to-God Baptist. And I don't know which is scarier because, there's a famous C.S. Lewis quote that I'm going to paraphrase that the worst kind of tyranny is the tyranny done on your behalf. Because, the honest-to-God tyrant, he may sleep for a day, but the tyrant that's doing it on your behalf will do so relentlessly because he does so with the conviction of his own conscience. And that can be much scarier in a way. And I think Jeff Sessions really does believe in the things he's saying. And he really is doing it because he thinks it's good for the country. And because of that, he will fight for it with every ounce of with every breath he has. And there's no fighting him. You got to get rid of him. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has put him in that position to lord over the rest of us. Really unfortunate.
It is really unfortunate, and it's infuriating. And to me, it's very infuriating that the most libertarian senator in the United States Senate voted for the confirmation of Jeff Sessions. But ultimately, we just have to go forward from here and keep pointing out the cruelty and the foolishness of the war on drugs. And I think eventually it's going to fall down on itself.
Yeah, that dude's got to die at some point, right? Like, he's getting old.
Right. Well, and eventually he's going to leave office, whether that's at the end of Trump's first term, hopefully it's only one term, whether it's from some scandal. I guarantee you Jeff Sessions has skeletons in his closet because, the Baptists, when you talk about the bootleggers and the Baptists are the Baptists primarily because it's a psychological mechanism for them to deal with their skeletons. So, maybe something is going to come out about Jeff Sessions that'll force him from office. Or maybe he'll have a fight with Trump or something. But ultimately, it's what we have to do is spread the ideas. And I'm never shy about when I talk about drugs. Every single substance on earth should be legal. And people should have the freedom. There is absolutely no world, morally speaking, there's no world in which, or no justification in the world to tell a human being what they may or may not put in their own body. Not if they own themselves. There should be no need for further discussion. But the fact that there is tells me that these ideas have to be spread far and wide. And that's what I'm very dedicated to doing as much as I can. Because we shouldn't even have to have this discussion about look at the secondary harms, look at how the people are dying, look at how organized crime is funded. Shouldn't matter. Human beings are free. They can put what they want in their body.
Absolutely.
So what do you say then to... I mean, the Libertarian Party has traditionally always been the radicals and the pragmatists, and you're definitely more on the radical side. What do you say? What do you say to the pragmatists who are like, "Well, we can't talk about that because it scares people"?
Well, I say yes, we can talk about that. They don't. You don't. I don't think you can really make a libertarian more radical than me. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the moderates and the radicals have to get along. We do have to get along, and so. How do we do that? I think it's by being libertarians. So I'm of the opinion that Arvin Vora should go out and be Arvin and say what Arvin's going to say, and Larry Sharp should go out and be Larry and say what Larry's going to say, and everybody else should go out and be themselves, and we should be libertarians and just give each other and just realize that we're all going to have slightly different takes on it. We're going to have slightly different ideas, but that we all, I posted on somebody who was on Adam Kokesh's, I think it was campaign manager, was posting a stream of attacks against Bill Weld on Facebook. And I posted, hey man, I wish you'd take half that vitriol and direct it at the real enemy.
I saw that. That was Ben Farmer, I believe.
Yeah. I really wish we could do that. I mean, look, Bill Weld is not a radical like me, but is he a good person who wants to move the needle in the direction of freedom? I believe so. I'd like to be a libertarian and let everybody say what feels right to them, and let's work together when we agree, and let's go our separate ways when we disagree. And let's try to be open-minded and nice to each other and realize that the real enemy is at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The real enemy is in the Justice Department. You know, Ross Ulbricht is a prisoner, a political prisoner of these people who I think we'd all like to see freed. Let's keep our minds on that the real enemy is out there, and the real enemy is nobody in our party.
Yeah, exactly. And, as much as, like full disclosure, I'm not the biggest fan of Bill Weld myself, but you're right. He's not the enemy. He's not a perfect libertarian, but there's no such thing as a perfect libertarian.
I am.
Except for Zach. He's the perfect libertarian. But, he's not the enemy. And I would say that even people like within the Liberty Caucus and the Republican Party, as much as we may get mad at them for certain things they do, you mentioned Rand Paul earlier, as much as we may get mad at them for certain silly things they do, they're not the enemy either.
Rand Paul is not the enemy. I'm gonna criticize him every chance I get over the Jeff Sessions thing, but he's not the enemy.
No, see, the enemy are the statists out there who have the desire to control your lives, who want to tax you more, who want to regulate you more, who claim ownership over parts of your body.
Yeah.
And claim the right to put you in a cage for doing with your own body what you wish. That's the enemy.
Absolutely, it is. It is the enemy. And so that's going to be something, that I'm going to try to talk to people about as the campaign heats up for the 2020 nomination and everything. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to pull people aside, talk to them, buy them a beer, and say, listen, just remember who the real enemy is. And I think we can go very far if we just remember who the real enemy is.
Absolutely. So are you interested in running for things? Is that something that you've ever thought about?
Oh yes, I'll run for office eventually. The problem is here in Washington State we have a top two primary system, and I can't get into the general election, and so the idea of running when I don't get to be in the general election is less attractive.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me crazy because if I put R next to my name in my district, I could probably get elected with very little effort. Not very little effort, but with it would be realistic. Like I'm a respected doctor in my community. If I put an R next to my name in a heavily Republican district, I probably get to go to the state house. But I couldn't live with myself.
Mhm.
I wouldn't. So I'm not going to do that. But I would like to. I would say 10 years from now is probably when I'll start running seriously. And that's primarily because I want to build up the war chest to be able to launch a campaign that can push me over the top. I'm strongly considering sponsoring some ballot initiatives. And I'm going to start talking to some people pretty soon about sponsoring an initiative in 2019, maybe in Colorado and maybe in another state, that would make ballot access for presidential candidates conditional upon participating in debates that are open.
That would be cool.
And so the idea is that may be kind of a little way of a backdoor way to open up the debates. I'd like to try here in Washington to sponsor a ballot initiative to take party labels off the ballot entirely. I think that would level the playing field a lot, and then I'd probably be running for House or Senate or something like that, or State House, and I'd have a much better chance.
You know,
that's basically how Nebraska works.
Yeah, if you move to Nebraska, we have a nonpartisan unicameral, and we have ballot access.
Well, maybe I should check out Nebraska. I have to go look at some houses while I'm in town for the convention.
Definitely.
And, maybe I can get a Nebraska medical license and see about doing some temporary work in Nebraska and seeing how I like it. So I'll look.
You'll like it until winter hits, then you won't like it anymore.
Well, I did last winter. I did winter primarily in Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I survived that. I think I could survive a Nebraska winter.
All right, so we are hitting an hour. Actually, we're right at an hour. So anything you want to say before we wrap this up?
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing both of you at the UnConvention, the national convention. Also, there's an organization called Liberty International that I'm a big fan of, and we're having a convention in August in Krakow, Poland. And you guys, if you can make it there, you will never find a more amazing meeting of the minds than at a Liberty International meeting. It's an amazing experience. So, go Google Liberty International. It's formerly the International Society for Individual Liberty, but after ISIL and everything in the Middle East, they had to change their name.
You don't want to be associated with that.
Yeah. So that's I'll be there, and I hope you guys could make it there. The conference that they had last year in Puerto Rico was absolutely amazing, and I have high expectations for that one too.
But they had a Liberty conference in Puerto Rico, and nobody told me. Fail.
Well, that's because you're Asian.
And,
Shut up, Zach.
But yeah, it was a pretty amazing conference. So I hope. But I'm looking forward to seeing you guys. We're only a couple months out now from the UnConvention. So
yeah, I'm going crazy because there's so many moving pieces, and I've got my podcast and the stuff I do for the Nebraska LP, and I'm trying to do all this publicity stuff for the UnConvention. I actually just brought Nathan on to help me because I'm going nuts over here.
Yeah, throwing a convention is a very, very big undertaking,
Mm-hmm.
So, good work for you guys, and I think it's going to be amazing.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right, Nathan, send us out.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was a great conversation. I had a lot of fun. You know what? Every time we have a more unscripted episode, it always turns out to be a little better than when I micromanage and script it like crazy.
Come to the dark side.
But no, thank you so much for coming. This was a great conversation, and I can't wait to meet you at the UnConvention.
All right. Over and out.
Oh.